Now, in Burton's book, he describes deplorable physical conditions.
Yes.
Talk to me about that.
I just cannot conceive of what it was like to serve on the front line in the trenches for years at a time. The conditions were absolutely horrible. There was trench foot disease from the water. There were lice that they would be picking out. The danger of even just going to the bathroom, going to the latrines. The enemy snipers would be watching for you. It was incredibly dangerous, and you know, my grandfather was there. He died before I was born, but I just cannot imagine what it must have been like.
Well, when I was reading Burton's book, I mean, I was just overwhelmed with the mess. I mean, the sea of mud, the difficulty in just moving one piece of equipment, you know, 100 meters. I mean, sometimes guys were out there slugging away and getting picked off by the snipers, as you say, and sometimes shelling coming in, and they're almost immobilized by the mud, and it just was unending. The guys were physically fatigued most of the time. But you're saying that Curry had the wisdom to keep replacing guys at the front so that they were always energized and fresh. Kind of like what hockey teams do.
Yes, absolutely. You want well-rested people at the front.
Now, is it true that the Canadians, was it because of Vimy or apart from Vimy, but they developed a reputation as being the world's #1 frontline soldiers?
Absolutely. At Vimy Ridge and for the rest of the war, the Germans considered the Canadians the shock troops of the Allied forces. It was whenever the Canadians came into the line, it caused great fear on the other side. In the last, in 100 days, Canada's 4 divisions, we were very small. We had 4 divisions on the field. We defeated 64 German divisions. Oh. It was just an incredible rout that took place.
Why? I mean, why would the Canadians have this bulldog capacity?
Well, of course, some will say it was the frontiersman attitude and so forth. However, Curry believed and Byng believed only the best. You could not buy a commission in the Canadian Corps. You could not get there because you were a friend. The only way to leadership was excellence in leadership. That was one thing. Make sure the leadership is excellent. The other thing was they pushed decision-making to the front line. So the soldiers were told. They were told all the battle plans. The only thing they didn't know was the date and time of the attack. They knew everything else. Push it all down. Tell them what they need to know so that on the field they can make their decisions. They had, for the first time, every soldier had a map of the battlefield. They knew exactly where they were. Curry and Byng told the soldiers that in a crisis situation, a man may sometimes be wrong in making a decision, but if he doesn't make a decision, he's always wrong. And so the soldiers were told, whatever decision you make the best that you can, because they had the big picture. So we had tremendous amount of innovation taking place on the front lines. The soldiers were told, accomplish your objectives, but if you see something else, go do it. You're free to do it, as long as you get your primary objective. So the Canadian soldiers had a very entrepreneurial spirit. They were trusted the front line. They empowered them. They gave them the best equipment. Curry threw out the rifles that were being used, the Ross rifle, which was a career-limiting move for sure, but they were bad rifles on the battlefield, and he bought the British Lee Enfield. They made sure that their men were well cared for and trusted and empowered.
Now, am I right, as I recall from my reading, the first war was called the Great War?
At the time,
At the time. Yes. It was the most remarkable battle, or most remarkable...
The war to end all wars.
The war to end all wars, which of course it wasn't true. We had the Second World War just a few years later. Did the Canadians retain that kind of dogged frontline leadership character into the Second World War?
Yes, they did. Now, I have not studied the Second World War as much, but what I've been told by veterans is that often you found the Canadians at what was called the hinge point in an attack. In other words, the point. You'd have the Americans here, the British here, the Canadians would be right in the middle at the front. And so that did carry through to the Second World War.
Now, in your presentation, which you've entitled Leadership Lessons from Vimy Ridge, we've only got about 4 minutes, so I need a précis here. But what are the leadership lessons?
Real quick, there's 5. Be open to new ideas.
Be open to new ideas.
Yes, that's right.
You could expand on that a bit.
Okay. The creeping barrage, for example, was perfected by the Canadians. And so the idea of having the entire artillery firing in line and creating a line of fire that would creep forward in front of the men as they walked forward, it protected them. They didn't have to crawl or run across the battlefield. They could stand up and walk because of the protective fire.
This was a Canadian innovation.
It was a Canadian innovation. So
be open to new ideas.
Yes.
Number two.
Number two is to value the individual. And so that's some of what I talked to you about. You didn't have Canadians attacking against barbed wire, for example, because they get killed. Yeah. So Canadians invented a new artillery shell to blow through that. So they did a lot of things to preserve the life of the individual. The third point is to build a solid team. And unlike any of the other armies on the field, the Canadians fought together as a unit. And unless there was a real good reason to transfer you out, you stayed with the same people. You knew who was on your left and right. You also knew the units on either side and the divisions on either side. An incredible level of trust developed because of the strong teamwork. And then the fourth principle would be to train, equip, and empower the team. And so they made sure everybody else had I think it was about eight machine guns per unit. We had 64. Everybody else would have attacked with about 400 artillery pieces. We had almost 1,000. We made sure that technology worked for us. We empowered the troops. There's a lot of other things to say there. And then the final one is to set stretch goals.
Stretch goals?
The British thought it would take 6 weeks to take the ridge. The French thought it could never be done, and we did it in 8 hours. And it was by it forced the Canadians to be more creative. So in other words, we used the tunnels underneath the battlefield. We were able to pop up out of the ground far closer to the Germans than they thought we would be. We had all kinds of other surprises like that helped us get there. But we also had specific lines that we had to achieve by certain time periods and sub-goals to make sure that we advanced in step with each other. And in fact, the only really significant problem that we had was a hill called the Pimple. And that was because command broke down there and they did not they did not pursue the time frame. And most of the deaths that we suffered were as a result of that error. So there was one error that day, but the rest of it was flawless. It just moved forward exactly as planned.
Was Curry there while this was happening?
Oh, yes. He was commander of the 1st Division.
And what was his vantage point? How would he know what was going on?
He stayed fairly close to the front. Now, as generals, of course, they're not at the front. Right. But they had 7 different layers of communication with the front line. Yeah. So, they had telephone and telegraph. They had pigeons and flags. They had airplanes.
Pigeons?
Oh, yes, yes. There were 7 different redundant communication channels, so he was never out of touch with the front line. But he didn't have to give instructions to the front line because that had all been done months before. They knew what to do. It was just now play it out and watch it happen.
Has this become a part of military strategic legend? I mean,
yes,
do soldiers study how these guys handled Vimy?
Yes, they do. In fact, when I've done this presentation for the military, for some of the units, and they said this leadership training is standard training in the armed forces even today.
Now, you have a uniform in that presentation.
Yes.
You wear that by permission, right?
Yes, the Department of National Defense has given me permission to wear the uniform for the presentation. Otherwise, it's against the law to
you
can't do that.
You can't impersonate a soldier, can you?
No, but I've got written permission from them to do this presentation. It was picked up as a Year of the Veteran event as well when Cardis ran it, and Lieutenant General retired Michel Maisonneuve has given his personal endorsement of it.
Great story, John. John Pellowe is our guest, and he's not only the CEO of the 4Cs, the Canadian Council of Christian Churches, but he's also really an historian and an actor, presenting his one-man show on lessons from Vimy Ridge. Thanks for coming our way.
Thank you very much.